People forget facts, but they remember stories.
Oh.
Joseph Campbell.
I will always remember 2024 for me as the year of roof replacement. And it was applicable, but I finished my story and he said, well, what price range was that house in?
He was sassy about it.
He was sassy about it. And I was just like,
He was like,
same as yours.
not relatable.
Yeah, it is relatable.
You're like, it was the same.
I'm like, because they're telling it to me as a story.
Oh, right, because facts tell, stories sell. Hi, Alissa.
Hey, Katy.
Welcome to episode number 261.
Once upon a time.
I was thinking more like, there was this one time when I was at band camp. This episode is all about telling stories.
We love to tell stories.
We love it. That's what we do here, but also you need it for your business.
Mm-hmm.
It's vital.
So
That
important.
you're able to tell stories. It's really going to help you out. And I'm like, and many of the interesting tidbits here are brought to us today by ChatGPT, which kind of also makes me say, look, AI cannot tell your stories for you.
No.
Like, you have to experience things in the world and then be able to share them with your clients or potential clients or your database or whomever you're working with. So AI can't make up your stories.
No.
They're going to come naturally.
But what if I'm new and don't have any stories? I have some tips.
Oh, great. I'm so excited that you have tips.
So this is why I love the Monday morning meeting.
Right.
Because we sit in a circle. So our Monday morning meeting is our more personal meeting. Like, it's not the whole company comes to that. We sit in a circle. I mean, sometimes there is
This
a
is
lot
like a
of people
campfire.
there.
Do you
Yeah,
have
it's
like a little
campfire.
I love it.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And we go around and just share if there's, how did the weekend go? How did your open houses go? Are you struggling with anything right now? And then we help give that person advice, and then we move on. And then we end with just a little.
You sing Kumbaya.
Yeah, we hold hands, we sing Kumbaya. No. We just get ready to game plan for the week.
Got it.
But, I started real estate in 2011. And every time I go to one of those meetings, someone is going through something that I'm like, wow, I have not actually been through that.
And they're
myself.
all stories.
Yes.
And I do think that you can learn from someone else's stories and in real estate feel comfortable retelling the story to your clients, even though it didn't happen to you or your previous client. Hey y'all, if you've predominantly been a buyer's agent to this point, you may be feeling anxious right now. And I get that. The first 7 years of my business, I would take buyers over listings any day. Now, I know the importance of listings for long-term success, and I actually love listings. Having seller systems in place from first call all the way to closing changed my perspective and gave me the confidence to take listings. I wish I hadn't waited so many years to grow my business with listings, and you don't need to wait. I have been teaching my seller systems inside of Agent Systems 101 since 2020. And now I'm pulling those sections out for anyone ready to up their listing game. I opened up Effortless Listings, Proven Seller Systems for Agents for the first time last week. Don't worry if you missed the introductory price because you can still get into the course for 25% off this week only. I will be live teaching the course on August 14th, so jump in now and join me then. And don't worry, replays will be available. Grab Effortless Listings now at hustlehumblypodcast.com/effortless and take control of the future of your business.
Yes. So I will always, dropped my pen there.
Golly.
I will always remember 2024 for me as the year of roof replacement.
Oh, so many roof stories.
I have had so many roof issues this year. But I was hearing from our insurance guy that talks at our sales meeting, hey, this is going to be a problem. But it wasn't being a problem for me.
And you were like, no, it's fine.
Right. I haven't experienced this problem. I'm getting to the closing table with old roofs. No issue. Then at the Monday morning meeting, one of the people shared that the roof was fine. It was in decent condition and they had to replace it because they had 2 buyers that couldn't get insurance because of the age of it, even though it wasn't condition-wise. And that stuck with me. And so as I was going on listing appointments or buyer showings and looking at the disclosure, I was saying, hey, We just had an agent in our office. This is the situation. It didn't work out with the first buyer. They thought it was a fluke. Went to the second buyer, same thing. Ended up having to replace the roof regardless.
Right.
So I used his story until it did end up happening.
Until it was your story?
Yes. It did end up happening to me.
Yeah.
And one of my sellers had to replace the roof. But what was amazing, and so now I have that story.
Yeah.
But what was so helpful is that when the time came for me to have that conversation, like when I went on my listing appointment, I told these sellers that story of the man in my office who just had this happen on one of his transactions.
Right.
And they were like, I mean, our roof is old, but we are not looking to voluntarily
change it,
replace it. And I said, I know, I'm not necessarily suggesting that. I just want it to be on your radar.
Right.
We get a buyer, first thing, roof. They want a new roof. And they said, well, we knew this was coming. You know, we've been...
At least it wasn't out of left field.
Correct. And so, anyways, I have several roof stories now. And I have been through several different scenarios. And I'm still using these stories to talk to my sellers and my buyers about it. I have one right now where my seller is a first-time seller.
Okay.
And they bought a newer... I sold them this. They bought this house with me.
Okay.
We have it listed on the market now. It's been 6 years. They moved into something
not on the market 6 years.
No. I'm sorry. They lived in it 6 years, and I am listed. I am now their listing agent,
and it's been 6 long years.
No, that'd be terrible. But they ended up buying a newer house.
Okay.
So the house they bought was 3 years old. Roof 3 years old.
Everything's
no
3
issues.
years old.
Well, it came time to do their property disclosure. And, you know, the roof was kind of old when they bought it.
Yeah.
And now it's been 6 more years and I'm explaining to them and they got a little defensive. I said, it's just insurance. You can Google Louisiana insurance issues. And they were like, well, we don't want it. Like, we'll just let that buyer walk away. And I said,
they're all going to be the same.
Let me tell you a story about this buyer that walked away only for the second buyer to make a lower offer. And you still had to replace the roof. And I said, again, I am not telling you this must be done, but I do not want you to be surprised.
Right.
This is what I'm seeing in the marketplace.
Right.
And once I told them a few examples, they were like, oh, so we need to budget for this as in case.
Yeah.
And I said, yes. And now we're under contract and we're fighting about a roof.
Oh, man.
But at least this isn't a shock. They knew.
Right.
And it also made them feel better to know you're not alone.
Right.
The insurance companies are not picking on your house.
Yeah.
This is like the 6th time this year.
Well, here's a good quote for you. People forget facts, but they remember stories.
Oh.
Joseph Campbell.
That's really good.
They forget facts, but they remember stories. So if you tell them the story, it'll be like, you could just say factually, hey, insurance is kind of tough right now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're getting some flags on roofs. They would have heard you, that you would have given them the facts, but telling them the story of your clients who this is exactly what happened is different. It will stick with them. Well, you said this might happen, and here it is.
I also wrote down stories are facts. This is a story of something that actually happened.
Right.
So this is a real life example. Otherwise, it almost sounds like you're just giving your opinion.
Stories are not an opinion. They're a factual, right. You're retelling what happened.
And telling a seller with a 15-year-old roof that's not leaking that they might have to replace their
old roof
is not a popular opinion.
No.
But when you can share factual stories that are happening right now,
I know.
It just makes it makes the delivery easier.
Yeah. Here's another good one for you. Storytelling is the oldest form of education. Terry Tempest Williams. I love a good quote, but storytelling is the oldest form of education. The easiest way for us to get messages across to our buyers and our sellers and even other agents sometimes is to tell a story of a previous event.
A perfect example of this is how, like in school, I did not want to pay super attention in history, like the history books and the memorizing the dates and names of the battles and things like that. And now as adults, me and Tanner watch all these documentaries on these things. I'm like, because they're telling it to me as a story.
Oh, right. Because Facts tell, stories sell. Wait, but listen, while we're on that, I don't want to forget, and so the listeners can benefit from this too. Jay and I watched a movie last week called the something of warfare. The maybe it was the art of ungentlemanly warfare.
Okay.
It was based on a true story from World War II.
Oh.
So y'all would like that.
Okay.
It was really good.
Interesting.
It was really, really good. It was directed by Guy Ritchie.
Okay.
Enough of my movie tips for you. Okay. So how do you learn to be a good storyteller? Like some people just kind of naturally have it in them. I feel like I'm pretty good with a story, but I come from a family where my dad told stories all the time.
Mm-hmm.
He is the biggest storyteller.
Yeah.
So you can get better at them. When I was doing my research, it was like practice the story. Think about the audience. Think about the emotions that are attached to that story. Like we're not just trying to wrap facts up into like story form. You're going to have to like give it a little flair, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any tips on being a good storyteller for your clients?
Well, for me personally, if I'm telling a story, as you may know from listening to the podcast, I do have to watch that I don't ramble.
Yeah, we can get a little long-winded.
Just be mindful of the facts of the story and what's actually an important detail of this story.
Yeah. And I like that being a good listener is one of the tips to being a good storyteller. Like pay attention to how other people do it. Use social listening tools. And then when you're in the middle of telling the story, you adjust.
Mm-hmm.
Give them some of the emotional background. Like how are they receiving your story?
Yeah.
Mirror the body language.
Mm-hmm.
All of those kind of things. What are some stories you feel like you tell over and over again in your business? Do you have any? I have one at the top of my mind.
That I tell?
That I tell.
Oh, tell me yours.
Whenever I have to tell a buyer that it is in their best interest to get with a local lender to get pre-approved. And they say, but I bank with blank giant banking conglomerate.
Yes.
Where everyone has their checking account.
Yes.
That's where I would like to go. I say, that's okay. You can get approved there, but I highly recommend you also talk to a local lender. And here's why. Blank, your very favorite checking account, large bank conglomerate, worked with my client a few years ago. He insisted that's who he wanted to do his loan. Everything seemingly is going okay. They do take a lot more time. You're in line with everyone at the bank, not just the few people in your local area, but okay. And the day of closing, the bank said, hey, we're not going to have these documents ready for today. It'll have to be Monday. And the buyer had already packed up all of his belongings into a rented moving truck that was due back the same day after closing. Like he had to unload, bring back the truck. So he had to pay to keep the truck all weekend long so that he could wait for closing on the Monday. And he had nowhere to sleep because all of his stuff was inside of the truck.
Yeah.
And that's what happens when you use XYZ big bank conglomerate. I don't want that to happen to you, and I can't be sure, but you'd hate to find out on the last day when your stuff's already packed up that, yeah, by the way, it's just going to be a couple more days.
Big deal.
Big, huge deal. And it usually, that story and me having that personal experience made it very easy for me to retell it because I remember it like it was yesterday. And it was very easy for them to receive it. Oh, yeah, okay. So a lot of times I'll have a buyer who doesn't take that advice or does something against the story I told them. And then the bad thing happens that I told them was going to happen. And then I'm like, well, this will be great for my next one because I'm going to use this story.
I know.
I am going to help the next person learn from your mistakes.
Yeah.
So you should really be keeping a running list of all the things that your buyers and sellers do wrong because you know the outcome.
Yeah.
The outcome is so important.
I have one where someone did something right.
Oh, please tell us that.
At our sales meeting, we have a lender that specializes in the LHC bonds, which is the Louisiana Housing Corporation. It's a specific bond amount that is set aside for first-time home buyers who are first responders or teachers or in the medical field. There's a list, okay, of who could qualify for this.
Got it.
Well, every Wednesday, she gets up there and they give their spiel about this program, and it kind of goes in one ear and out the other. Fast forward, I have a buyer come, and I wasn't even thinking about the bond program. I just thought, oh, great, you need to get with local lender, go over budget. And so the lender calls me after their meeting and says, guess what? She qualifies to get all of her down payment covered with LHC bond. And I went, what? I said, well, how much higher is the rate? She was like, it's not. The only stipulation is she must live in it for at least 5 years, or you have to pay some of it back. After 5 years, it's forgiven.
Just gone.
She was like, when I tell you, there are no strings.
It's free money.
She was like, this is what I've been trying to tell you.
But she didn't tell a good story.
Well, it was once, and this is when it was a new thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now she has so many stories.
Yeah.
And I was so excited to see it in action that anytime it was a first-time home buyer, I'm like, what do you do for a living? Let me tell you about this teacher I just helped. And then it was like I could reach all the teachers and be like, teachers, let me tell you this story about a teacher just like you who just got all of her down payment covered. So it was just like I needed to experience it in real life to be passionate about talking about it.
For sure.
I couldn't just spit out the facts of, if you make at least this much money and you work in this profession.
Let me tell you about my buyer.
Yes.
Who got all of her down payment.
All of it.
She was a sweet blah, blah, blah.
So exciting.
Love it. All right. The structure of a story. Let's talk about it. Every story has a beginning.
Once upon a time.
You're going to introduce the context or the problem.
Okay.
Once upon a time, there was a very old roof. Okay. The middle of your story, the structure is to describe the journey, including the challenges and the solutions. Okay. And then the end of your story would be to conclude with the resolution and the positive outcome.
Yes.
I mean, and sometimes when you're retelling, there was a negative outcome, but we're just trying to avoid that for the next person.
Well, I was laughing because we always say, learn from our mistakes.
Please.
Because we share our mistakes so that you can learn.
Well, like that's how the email templates were created. Like, okay, well, that thing went wrong. This thing went wrong. This
needs
thing like,
to be
how
added,
can we avoid?
edited.
Yeah, you're avoiding things the next time, right? Some other tips for your storytelling are to know your audience, to identify your client's needs. So understanding your client's needs, their preferences, and their pain points. Okay. And then you're going to tailor your stories, customize your stories to address specific client concerns and situations. It's way easier to do them on situations.
Yeah.
Like this happens every time. I have another, like you have these that you do all the time. You don't realize. Oh yes. It is every inspection I've ever been to, the inspector says the AC needs to be cleaned and serviced.
Correct.
But you tell that little mini story over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, that is a mini story.
Yes.
Like, listen, Mr. Seller, they're going to say it needs to be cleaned even if you just had it cleaned.
I have another one. Whenever a client gets a little nervous about their inspection and they're like, what if it doesn't pass? And I'm like, well, it's not pass or fail. I said, here, let me put it to you this way. I had an inspector once that was going through the house. They're making their way through all the parts and they're getting towards the end of the inspection. And he said, whoa. And I'm like, what is it? He's like, well, if I don't find any legitimate items to put on the inspection report, like there's legitimately nothing wrong with the house, I give the inspection for free. And I have yet to have a house that got a free inspection. He said, and this one was really close. And then he had come across like a whatever. Okay. And he was like, we were really close. But I often would retell that story because it helped the buyer to understand there's going to be things on this report.
Yes.
No house has ever gone without having an item that was, needing maintenance or had an issue or whatever. So I would tell that story a lot.
It's a great story.
It's a really good one. Let's talk about a little story. I showed you a reel the other day. And it was an agent who's retelling a story that did not happen to her, but it was about feedback. Do you remember?
Yes.
She said there was a buyer's agent who was being sued because they gave feedback after a showing.
Negative feedback.
Yeah. Basically, the buyer had said, I don't like this house. It's priced too high for me and it's in poor condition. So the agent sends in the feedback, priced too high, poor condition. No, thank you. right? Buyer's not interested. A few days later, the buyer comes back and says, I've changed my mind. We want to make an offer on the house.
Eek.
Okay, fine. They make an offer. They successfully negotiate the, contract. They go to inspection. They ask for repairs. The seller is like, no, we're not doing anything. And the seller is just generally difficult the whole time, right?
Yes.
They go to the closing table. The seller says, hey, I just wanted to let you know that we were being difficult because of your feedback. And you said that the house was in poor condition and that it was overpriced, and that just bothered us. And the buyer then sued their agent and said that they had breached their fiduciary duty by giving that feedback, which had then basically harmed their position in the transaction.
Yes.
But the agent had no clue at the time.
Interesting.
It's a fascinating story. And if your seller, I'm like, how would we wrap this around? Like, when would you use the story, right? But like, if your seller's like, I need the feedback, I need it right away. I'm like, well, buyer's agents are a little reluctant to send feedback right away until they're absolutely certain their buyers don't want it. And here's an example of why.
That's great.
Right? And then your seller's gonna be like, oh yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's pretty serious.
Y'all, we cannot believe it is our 5th birthday.
And even though it's our birthday, you deserve the gifts.
We are doing several giveaways and product discounts. Head over to hustlehumblypodcast.com or our Instagram page to see all the ways you can participate.
Contests will run starting August 5th, and we will announce the winners on our actual birthday, August 19th.
And to our community friends, we will be having a fun birthday Zoom on August 22nd. Mark your calendars. Cheers to 5 years.
Another time you're storytelling in real estate is with your listing descriptions, right? I mean, I don't like them when they get too frou-frou. Like, I'm more like, what are the facts of the house? Like, I need to know what's going on here. But you are trying to paint a picture, if you will.
Yeah.
They often say that you want to appeal to like people's emotions or all of their senses, like, but I don't like it too flowery, but I think a little bit of adding in touches of a good story are fine.
Yes.
Here's a good quote for you. Gary V, my favorite. Storytelling is by far the most underrated skill when it comes to business. But that's true. So true. Do you want some more tips?
Yeah.
Okay, so here are some other tips on how we're using storytelling in real estate and what you need to be looking out for. You want to be authentic and use genuine stories. Use real experiences from past clients or from your own, like if you bought a house, your own professional journey, any of that. Transparency, share both successes and setbacks. And that will build trust and relatability. Like not every story is great. Like not everything turns out well. Use relatable characters. So client personas, create characters that your clients can relate to. Like if you're telling a story to a first-time buyer, it's going to make more sense to them if the story you're telling is about a first-time buyer, right? Like It's not going to make much sense if it's someone who's like a move-up buyer and blah, 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 whatever. Emotional connection, you want to highlight the emotional aspects of their journey. You want to highlight the process, address common pain points, and show empathy. So show that you understand what their challenges are, such as financing or finding the right property or even dealing with paperwork. You have to do this a lot, right? When you're like, hey, I know these documents are kind of long and tedious, but feel free to call if you want to talk it through. But anyway, address common pain points, incorporate testimonials. These are the really good ones. Like the little mini stories that are like, hey, I had a buyer who was this. They were looking for this. This is what they had to do to get the right loan. This is the house that they ended up with.
Yeah.
Like these are the stories you should be telling instead of the just sold post.
Yes.
They should be, here's the type of buyer I was working with. Here's the challenges that we had. Here are how we met their, goals or how we had to adjust their goals and then they met their goals. Like that's what the people who are listening to your stories via social media or whatever, that's what's going to help them.
What it took to get to the closing table.
Yeah. How do I become a homeowner? How do I reach those goals? So I do like a client testimonial. And make sure to include stories from all different types of clients to appeal to a broader audience. Like if you are just only sharing your first-time buyer stories, you're just going to have first-time buyers.
One time I was sharing a story about a house to a luxury seller, and it was applicable, but I finished my story and he said, well, what price range was that house in?
He was sassy about it.
He was sassy about it, and I was just like,
He was like,
same as yours.
not relatable.
Yeah, it is relatable.
You're like, it was the same.
The same.
But that's a great point. They're not going to relate to it if it's not about the same situation.
Yeah, he's like, don't compare my house to this if it's not the same.
Interesting.
But I was like, it is the same. This was the same thing. But it made me realize that it could have been different if it had been a different type of house.
Right. And then he would have been like, well, that's not the case here. Sellers typically also, especially in a higher price point, want to be like, well, that's not the way it is with the type of people who are going to look at my house. I could see how that would be a problem. Here's another good quote from, have you ever read a Seth Godin book?
No.
He's a marketing genius. And I didn't know this about him. I was listening to a podcast in preparation. He basically created email marketing.
Oh.
Like, he had his first email address in 1976.
What?
I was not even born yet. Like, the internet wasn't even available to everyone.
How did he have an email address?
Well, he apparently built software. Like, he was on the front end of the internet.
Okay.
Is that not wild?
Yeah.
Anyhow, he said attention was scarce. And so he, like, started email marketing as a way to get, because that's where people's attention was moving. His email marketing company started with an 88% open rate, like back in the day. But he said, what I thought was interesting is that he writes every day. He writes a blog every single day.
Wow.
And has for many, he said he's written over 9,000 blog posts.
Oh my gosh.
And he said, I would recommend that you write a blog, even if you change your name, even if no one ever sees it. But he said, writing every day makes you honest. And I was like, that's fascinating. And, you know, our friend Sarah does Morning Pages, which is in, I think The Artist Way is the book that it's in. Morning Pages is you just get out your notebook and you have to write for 3 pages.
Oh, wow.
Stream of consciousness, but it has to be 3 pages and it's supposed to be in the morning and it doesn't have to be about anything. But it kind of
just ramble away for 3 pages. See what comes out.
See what comes out. Maybe there's a story in there. Maybe that whenever I write like the weekly email to the database, I'm like, what thing happened to me this week that, especially if it's something I've retold, if something happened to you and you had to retell it and then you retell it again and then you'd retell it again, the story keeps getting fine-tuned, like you tell it better, but it also means that it's interesting enough for, okay, well, if then the first person thought it was interesting and then you're like, wait, I got to tell you the story, right?
Yes.
Wait until you hear this. I don't think you've ever come here and one of us not been like, you have to hear the story.
We always have a story.
There's always a story. There's always a story. But I liked that writing every day could help you kind of hone in on your storytelling skills. Like you're just kind of practicing, even if no one is paying attention. And he says, Seth Godin, marketing is no longer about the stuff you make, but about the stories you tell.
Oh, that's good.
And then he said, people think in stories, not statistics, and marketers need to be master storytellers. Which made sense to me.
Yeah.
Do you follow any good realtors who tell good stories?
You?
Well, I mean, I'm not like a regular storyteller, though, on my social.
I'm not like the best follower.
Okay. Have you ever seen any of Glenda Baker's videos?
Yes.
Glenda has the art of storytelling down.
She does.
Right?
She's good.
And she has some wild stories, but I also think she tells them perfectly.
She does.
Right? Like, they're not long because they're in Reels usually, or TikToks is where she became pretty famous. So they're short, but she can get a lot done in a little short time. And I think that if you want to just see someone telling real estate stories, I would like check her out. But there are quite a few realtors on social media that are telling stories. Do you ever worry about any of the stories you tell on the show?
So if I ever share a story on the show, I know that, one, it is not someone who would listen to the show.
Right.
And 2, if they did, I would not care. I would never share something that I would be afraid that would come back on me.
Right.
And like, I would never do that
And
on the podcast.
They're all true.
Yeah.
All stories told here are true.
I don't share names. Even when I
Right.
share difficult situations I've been in, I'm not sharing names and
Yeah.
addresses. But
Mhm.
the stories are important to know.
Yeah, they're very important to know, but that's how we learn, by the story. Okay, the last thing I really wanted to say about you need to tell your story in business to get people bought into wanting to work with you, right? One of the easiest ways to do this is to be present on social media. And there is an easy way. If you're on Instagram or Facebook or anything that has a stories feature, right? So quick little snippets. Chelsea always says, get up in the morning and make sure that you do basically a morning, noon, and late. Like, so early, mid, late every day, beginning, middle, end. Maybe every morning you do a coffee story and you go to your favorite coffee shop and you tell people what you're doing that day, or you don't. Maybe you just tell them what coffee you're getting. Maybe in the middle of the day, it's like, this is what this house looks like that I showed. Or maybe at the end of the day, it's like, this is me writing my offer or whatever. But I like the fact that you could get into your stories and kind of give a behind the scenes and people are following along with your life.
Yes.
My favorite people to follow on social media are the ones that I'm like, okay, what are they doing now? Like, I need to know what they're up to today. And I want to like follow along and through all of the stories. And then you get kind of, it's like you're actually really friends.
Yeah.
Because you
got to know them through their stories.
The more you post, the more people will connect with you and the more they'll be able to reach out to you as someone they feel like they already know.
Yeah.
And stories are really good for that. Literal stories and the stories in your social media.
I went through a phase, I need to get back onto it, but where after every closing, I always wrote down my transaction closing and then where they came from.
Okay, yeah.
But then I started adding just one quick thing, like what is the one thing I will remember about this transaction?
Oh, that's very smart.
Yeah, so it could be like, this is the one where we had to replace the roof.
Like what stood out?
Yes. Like what are the things that happened in this transaction that I will remember? And I've just tried to pick one thing. Okay. And it really makes me go, wow, I feel every transaction really does have a story.
Something. Yeah.
It's very rare to have a very uneventful transaction where nothing happened.
Right. Or even sometimes it's just the story of why they had to move. Oh, fascinating. That's good. What will you do with that? Just go back and like think about them?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I just felt like I needed to start. I noticed that as my career continues, I was forgetting
the stories.
Yeah, or addresses. Or like I used to always remember, oh, Ursuline, that was the house that had this weird addition. Like,
and now you can't.
Now I'm like, that address sounds familiar.
But you're like, your face looks familiar. You're like, I don't know.
It's been 84 years.
Like, what did we do together?
No, it's more, I don't like that I'm forgetting that.
The transaction.
Yeah.
But that is really interesting. It brings up a point. Like we're in a transactional business, but we're trying to build it through relationships. So you kind of need to remember some of these details.
Yeah, it's almost like they say when you meet somebody and you're trying to remember their name to think of something that starts with the letter of their name.
Do you do this?
No, I don't do that.
No.
But that was my thinking behind the pick one thing.
I'll like associate something.
I will associate something with this transaction in hopes of keeping the memory alive.
Okay, that's good. I like that. That's really good. I also read a tip that you should update your stories regularly.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah, well, they're
fresh
always
content.
going.
You need fresh content. Regularly update your stories to reflect new experiences and changing market conditions. That's true, too. If you're, it's not always going to be the same appropriate stories based on what the market is doing.
Yeah.
Stories are also very important when you're picking a list price. Like, here's the story of the house that sat on the market. Here's the story of the house that...
And here's what happened.
That they moved out before they got... they had it under contract. Then they moved out. Then the contract fell through. And then they weren't taking care of the house. And then they had to sell it for less because they weren't living in it anymore.
Right. Yeah. They need real-life examples to make it real to them.
Yeah.
This is not just cautionary warning advice. This is a real life story. It could happen to you. I'm trying to help you.
This could happen to you. This could happen to you.
I love stories.
I do too. I love hearing stories. I love telling stories.
Yeah.
It is really helpful for your business. I think you need stories for you as a person for your business, like who you are and what you're doing. That's the easiest way for people to get to know you. But also you need the stories to use in your day-to-day business dealings.
Yes.
Buyers and sellers, they're not creative enough.
Mm-mm.
They need you to explain it, not with facts. They don't want to hear the
real
facts.
life examples.
Real examples.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else about storytelling you'd like to
I don't think so.
say?
We need to let them know to tune in next week.
Oh, yeah.
For stories.
You're right. It's going to be HOA stories.
Yeah, they're very interesting and very funny.
Y'all wrote in your stories and we're going to tell them.
We're going to read your stories next week to piggyback off of last week's HOA episode.
Yeah, which was more informational.
Yes.
These are going to be the stories of what happens in the HOA.
Y'all are good storytellers.
Hey, you're so good. Remember when we did the haunted stories?
Yes.
Ghost
The
stories?
Halloween, the haunted
house stories?
Yes.
It was haunted house stories.
That was crazy.
Last Halloween. That was one of my favorite ones.
Oh, that
If
was
you
a
like
good
to
one.
hear a story, you should definitely go back and listen to that one.
Yes, that was a good
It
one.
is crazy. Wow. Okay, I think that's really all for storytelling. Would love to hear some of your stories. Feel free to email them to us.
Yeah, we love
Maybe if you
stories.
send in a bunch of good ones, we'll do another episode of random stories.
Oh, that would be good. Just stories.
Your best real estate story, your most useful real estate story.
That's good.
Things that will help each other, but also might make us go, oh my God,
Wow.
how did this happen?
Well, we just had our community live today. Well, not today as you're listening to this, but today as we're recording this.
Mhm.
And we have agents in other states where they're operating already
Mhm.
and in a certain capacity that we're not yet.
Yeah.
And it's been fascinating, getting a sneak preview
Yeah.
of what's to come. But it also made me feel more prepared.
Yes, for sure.
Hearing their stories, they're doing it, they're making it, it was just nice.
Yeah, it's
very
very
comforting.
Nice. Yeah, story is always helpful.
Mhm.
Your kids always, when you're nervous or anxious about something or confused, stories fix
Mhm.
all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Let me tell you the story about how it went down.
Mm-hmm.
People want to hear a real life story. That's what we're all about here. The real life stories. All right, shall we do a toast?
Yeah, here we go.
Okay. Goodbye.
Hi, I'm Nina Wiseman. I'm from Indiana, from the Naira, and I am toasting to Marky Lemons and Tracy Hawkins. And I want to say thank you to both of you strong women for helping me show how strong I am. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Hustle Humbly podcast.
If you enjoyed this episode, please go to ratethispodcast.com/hustlehumbly and leave us a review or drop a comment if you're listening on Spotify.
If you have an episode topic or someone you'd like to toast on the show, please email us at team@hustlehumblypodcast.com.
Find us on social media at Hustle Humbly Podcast. Don't forget to find all of the free resources at hustlehumblypodcast.com/resources.
See you next week.